Hello and welcome to another episode of India Global. I am Ankit Tyagi. Let's quickly track the headlines at top of the bulletin. Rupee weakens to record low of 85 rupee per dollar. Rupee hits new low after US Fed rate cut. All 51 defendants found guilty in France mass rape trial. Ex-husband Dominique Pellico jailed for 20 years. Zelensky-Macron discuss French troops in Ukraine war. UK considers sending troops to train Ukrainian soldiers. President-elect Donald Trump opposes deal to avert government shutdown. Trump rejects stopgap bill aimed to keep the government funded. India-Pakistan matches to be held at neutral venue, says the ICC, confirms hybrid model for Champions Trophy 2025. Our top focus, ladies and gentlemen, the weakening rupee against the dollar. The rupee has dropped 12 paise to an all-time low of 85.06 against the US dollar in the early trade, as hawkish, in fact, tilt from the US Federal Reserve sparked a broad dollar rally. This decline comes after the United States Federal Reserve cut key interest rates by 25 basis points and signaled fewer rate cuts in 2025, signaling a more cautious monetary policy stance and pressuring emerging markets, currencies, including the Indian rupee. Now, the rupee's decline is not an isolated event. All other Asian currencies also, in fact, weakened during the day. The Korean won, in fact, and Malaysian currency, and along with the Indonesian rupee also, in fact, fell from 0.8 to 1.2% during the day. Sakshi Bajaj explains more details.
Global markets plunged in trade today following the US Federal Reserve's outlook projecting only 2 rate cuts in 2025 and not the 4 rate cuts projected earlier. The Dow posted its longest losing streak since 1974. Asian markets tumbled sharply, and the Nifty and the Sensex declined by over 1% each. The Indian rupee also weakened to an all-time low of 85 rupees to the dollar.
What are investors and analysts alike reacting to? Well, they're reacting to the Fed's outlook. The Fed's outlook of just 2 rate cuts in 2025 as compared to 4 rate cuts projected earlier in September. That really is significant, as the Fed is saying that, look, they are estimating and anticipating at the moment that inflation will remain stubborn and above that target range for longer than anticipated.
The spotlight now is on what will US President-elect Donald Trump's key priorities be as soon as he assumes duties in office, especially after reportedly reiterating his intention of imposing reciprocal taxes on India. Sakshi Bajaj for NDTV.
Let's go across to my colleague Alex Matthew, who's joining us with more details and the implications of this downfall of the rupee.
The big headline in the financial world this morning is that the rupee has breached 85 against the dollar for the first time in its history. It is at a record low, and at this juncture, it has fallen about 2.2% against the dollar in 2024. It is a big headline, of course, but the context is important to understand as well. And that context is that the dollar index, which measures the strength of the dollar against a raft of currencies, itself has risen about 2.5% in 2024. Overnight, the dollar index gained strength because of what the Fed said in the outcome of its meeting. Of course, it cut rates by 0.25 percentage points, but it indicated that it will likely go slow in the new year as far as rate cuts are concerned. That had a bearing on all markets across the board, and the dollar, as I said, gained strength. The Reserve Bank of India has been intervening periodically over the course of the last few months and trying to maintain a little bit of stability in the foreign exchange, as a result of which you've had the rupee more or less hold strong, while a lot of other currencies around the world have actually lost ground against the US dollar. Going forward, of course, what you need to understand is the implication. For importers, a weaker dollar is not a good thing, and it's a major issue for India because of the crude imports that we have in our country, and also gold imports. That's something that we've seen a rise in the recent past. Of course, that is another story altogether, with the latest data being questioned. But it's positive from the perspective of the exporters. They will be cheering to a certain extent, and that can have an impact in the third quarter of this current financial year. I'm talking about the December quarter, as well as in the first and the second quarter of the new calendar year, that is next year. So that should give you a little bit of perspective on what has happened about the rupee. Of course, equity markets are bearing the brunt of the Fed's decision as well.
All right. So it leaves us with some important questions, and we'll discuss those questions. So what are the big questions that we'll be discussing in just a short while from now with our experts? What triggered rupee's dive to a record low at 85.06 at this moment? And also what we'll be talking about will be how will the emerging markets like India, how can these markets rebound? And then we'll also talk about how can India get back on track for 7.2% growth rate. Joining me now to discuss these issues at this moment, Professor Arun Kumar, Senior Economist. He's with us at this moment, and Professor Santosh Mehrotra, Senior Economist, Visiting Professor, Center for Development, University of Bath, United Kingdom. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us at this moment. Professor Kumar, I want to start by asking you, rupee we have seen that continuously there has been decline as far as the strength of the rupee is concerned. Now with the Fed's announcements, it has taken the lowest tumble so far at 85.06. What is the short and the long-term outlook that you are in fact seeing as far as the rupee is concerned?
I'm not able to hear you clearly, but from what I understand, what you're asking is that what is going on regarding the short run and the long run.
Yeah.
What I can make out is that, you see, with the election of President Trump as the president of the US, there is a huge uncertainty in the global situation and therefore for India. Whenever there's uncertainty, what tends to happen is that people shift towards dollar and towards gold. That's what seems to be happening, and the Fed is reflecting that uncertainty by reducing the interest rate by 0.25%, but giving the advisory that next year it will not cut as much. So it's signaled to the market that there is going to be a huge uncertainty till Trump takes over as the president of the United States. That's the external part. The internal part is that, we've had a huge trade deficit. Imports have shot up, the exports have declined, and therefore, these two together are signaling that the rupee will decline further. Also, because the rate of growth has declined, so I think people's confidence that Indian economy is doing well, that has been, somewhat dampened. Also, going forward, the employment situation is not very good in the country. And what happens is that, because of the unorganized sector not doing so well, the unorganized sector, which employs 94% of the workforce, that actually is the problem. So in other words, the internal instability and the internal, problem coupled with the external instability globally, these two together, I think, are what underlie the decline of the rupee and the decline of the stock markets in India.
Right.
So I think, yeah.
Professor Santosh Mehrotra, how can India, in fact, at this moment, because like Professor Kumar was explaining, it's a combination of factors, external and internal. Not much can be done with what is happening, over our shores. But within India, what is it that the government, in fact, can do to safeguard and make sure that the economy is on the right track?
Let's face it, the rupee has actually appreciated, and it's a good thing that the rupee is now depreciating. Let me explain. India's exports, as Professor Arun rightly just said, have not been growing, and one very important reason why exports have not been growing and imports have been growing is that we have our inflation rate is relatively higher than that of our competitors, and we have the RBI has unfortunately intervened far too much in the foreign exchange market. It has kept the rupee stronger than it needs to be or deserves to be. If you look, you see, what is the most important indicator from the purposes of India's export? The most important indicator is the real effective exchange rate. The real effective exchange rate, or the RER, in India's case has been appreciating because our rupee has been, our inflation rate has been relatively high, while the inflation rate in other countries has been falling. So we must not, in India, take a nationalistic, patriotic kind of view about the rupee's fall. The real effective exchange rate must remain stable, and it should slightly depreciate, and it should depreciate slowly because of our inflation rate. Please remember that our exports were growing at a strong pace from 2004 to 14 because the real effective exchange rate was constant. On the other hand, in the last 10 years, we've allowed, the RBI has kept on intervening, and therefore we've allowed our rupee to appreciate. And that's not a good thing because that encourages imports, as has been happening, and it discourages export.
Right.
So it's just as well that on the Indian side, we don't do very much. We just watch the market, and the RBI would be well advised to keep off because it has been actually intervening a lot. It has been intervening not just in the spot market.
Okay.
It's been intervening in the forwards market, and it's been hiding all the activities in its forward market. And that's a problem.
Right.
Because those are settled in dollars. Please appreciate that. Yeah.
Professor Arun Kumar, you know, a lot of people, those who would be watching, you know, both in India and abroad, there is a sense of, you know, panic in the short-term investors. What would be your advice to people, those who are invested, you know, in the Indian stock market, which saw massive growth and now a period of decline? Professor Kumar, can you hear me, sir?
Hello, I can't hear.
We'll try and fix that. We'll just try and fix that. You know, Professor Mehrotra, if you could take that.
Yeah, I can take that. You see, it's just what will happen is that if the rupee does depreciate, obviously foreign investors are likely to be encouraged to remain in the Indian market, and the Indian stock market will not fall as much as it has been falling, despite the fact that the US Fed has decided to keep its interest rate down to only two reductions rather than more reductions of its interest rate in the year 2025. So as long as the dollar fetches more rupees, there is no particular reason why dollars will not flow in from the foreign portfolio investors. So that will tend to stabilize the market. That's point one. Point two, we have to remember, is that 2 million odd domestic retail investors are joining India's stock market every month. That's been happening. And the number of domestic investors, retail investors, not just the domestic institutional investors, have held the Indian stock market up. So I don't see much ground for panic here. These kind of ups and downs are likely to happen in the stock market. As it is, the stock market's doing rather well, much better than the economy is doing.
Absolutely, yes.
Because there are real issues about the fundamentals of India's economy. In the last 10 years, the growth rate of the economy, even by the government's own estimates, and those are not all very kosher, as both Professor Arun and I would agree. By its own estimate, it's 5.8%. In the preceding 10 years, the growth rate had been 7.8%. So there's already, we know that the government admits to a 2 percentage point lower growth rate.
Right.
So look, the point is that the growth rate is all international agencies have been saying for some time, whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, that India is not going to be growing in the 2020s until 2030 at anything more than 6.5, 6.7%. So this 8.4 that happened in the previous quarter was already the peak. And if you see what's been happening to the growth rate, as the government or the CSO is telling us,
Right.
you look at every quarter from the last quarter of the financial year 23, every quarter it has fallen. 5.4 is the outcome in the most recent quarter.
So no need to panic. This is just volatility. I mean, if you are a long-term investor, just sit tight. In fact, it is not going to impact you as much. Don't panic at this moment or take any decision. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me at this moment. That's all the time that I have on this discussion. Some update from the Russia-Ukraine war, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has revealed he discussed the potential deployment of Western troops in Ukraine with French President Emmanuel Macron. Earlier this year, Macron had suggested the possibility of sending ground troops to Ukraine, a stance that contrasts sharply with other Western leaders who have been cautious about escalating the conflict. In a post on X, Zelensky stated Ukraine and France share a common vision that reliable guarantees are essential to achievable peace, unquote. He also expressed Ukraine's commitment to working with Macron's initiative to stabilize the path to peace. Macron's office reaffirmed France's unwavering support to Ukraine, calling it an absolute priority and pledging to continue providing the means for Ukraine to defend itself and counter Russia's aggression. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he is ready for potential talks with United States President-elect Donald Trump amid the expectations that the new administration in Washington will push for negotiated end to the war in Ukraine. In an escalation in another front in the crisis in West Asia, Israeli troops have launched a series of airstrikes on Yemen's capital, Sana'a, killing at least 9 people shortly after a Houthi missile targeted central Israel. Now, Thursday's strikes risk further escalation in the conflict with the Iranian-backed Houthis, who attacks on the Red Sea corridor have drastically impacted global shipping. Israel's military said it conducted 2 waves of strikes in a pre-planned operation that began early Thursday, which involved 14 fighter jets. The military said the first wave of strikes targeted Houthi infrastructure at ports of Hodeidah, Saif and the Ras Isa oil terminal on the Red Sea. Then in the second wave, the strikes were in fact to target the military targets. The fighter jets targeted Houthi energy infrastructures in Sana'a. Bangladesh has barred 20 former and current government officials from leaving the country over their involvement in cases of enforced disappearances. The Bangladeshi Home Ministry asked the security officials to withdraw the passports of those barred from leaving the country. The directive follows a request from the Commission of Inquiry on Enforced Disappearances. The letter mentions the second phase of investigations identified 20 additional government officials allegedly linked to cases of enforced disappearances, requesting the suspension of their passports and measures to prevent their departure from the country to aid the probe. The 20 former and current government officials include retired additional IGP and former Director General of Rapid Action Battalion. The United States of America has sanctioned 4 Pakistani entities, including the state-owned flagship aerospace and defense agency, National Development Complex, on charges of contributing to armed Islamabad's long-range ballistic missile program. The State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, noted the entities were sanctioned under an executive order that targets proliferators of the weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. The move freezes any United States property belonging to the targeted entities and bars Americans from doing any business with them. Apart from NDC, the three other entities sanctioned by the United States are Akhtar and Sons Private Limited, affiliates International and Rockside Enterprise. All three are based in Karachi, while the NDC is in Islamabad. Shortly after the US statement, Pakistan said such policies have dangerous implications for strategic stability of our region and beyond. All right, we are slipping into a short break. On the other side, India versus China. Which way is Sri Lanka tilting? Welcome back. Now to a story from France which had shocked not just the country but the entire world. In fact, this is after the report of repeated rape on this woman by her own husband. Now, a French court has found all 51 defendants guilty in a drugging and rape case that horrified the world. Giselle Pellicot's ex-husband of 50 years, Dominique Pellicot, had pleaded guilty to drugging her and repeatedly for almost a decade to rape her and to offer her unconscious body for sex to dozens of strangers he had met online while videographing the entire abuse. The panel of 5 judges sentenced, Dominique to maximum 20 years in a jail as requested by the prosecutors. The court imposed generally, shorter terms than 4 to 18 years demanded by the prosecution for the other defendants, almost all of whom were accused of raping Giselle. NDTV's Ross Cullen joins us from Paris for more on this story. Let's go across to Ross. Ross, just take our viewers through and just give us viewers a sense of the outrage and now what happens in this case.
Well, after 3.5 months, one of the most high-profile trials that France has ever seen has come to a conclusion. Judges in the southern French city of Avignon giving their verdicts on Thursday, finding all the defendants guilty. Now, the man at the heart of this trial, Dominique Pellicot, the former husband of Giselle Pellicot, sentenced to 20 years in jail, the maximum sentence. That was the length of time that the prosecutors had asked the judges to apply, and they have handed down that 20-year sentence, of which he's likely to serve about 2/3 of that time behind bars, and his lawyer also has not ruled out appealing against that sentence. All of the other defendants were found guilty and given custodial sentences ranging between 5 and 13 years. However, some of the men, at least 3 of them, did walk free on Thursday because they've already completed the required time behind bars during the trial. Now, Giselle Pellicot was speaking after the court proceedings on Thursday. She thanked her supporters, saying that she respected the decision, respected the verdicts from the judges, and that she never regretted her decision to go public. This trial could have been behind closed doors, but Giselle Pellicot wanted it to be in the public domain. The facts of the case are harrowing. She was drugged repeatedly by her husband for a period of 9 years. He then raped her, and he also recruited men online to come to the family house and attack Giselle Pellicot. So the trial has concluded now, but there are the possibilities that the prosecution might appeal against those sentences, asking for them to be reviewed and potentially increased. Ross Cullen, NDTV, Paris.
A day after Sri Lankan President Anura Kumara Dissanayake completed his 3-day visit to India, where he gave New Delhi key security assurances as well as investment opportunities and more, Dissanayake met with Queen Boyong, vice chairperson of the political advisory body of the Chinese Communist Party, who was visiting Sri Lanka. Discussions, in fact, between both the leaders, a development of a partnership, investments and possible resumption of maritime research. In the meeting, Dissanayake expressed gratitude to the Chinese government for its support during debt restructuring as well as in the face of economic crisis, while emphasizing the continued need for Chinese support in the future. With this meeting, Dissanayake signals Sri Lanka's balancing act between India and China, with the government noting, in fact, that they want a win-win situation with all the countries, What does this mean for India? Let's try and decode this. So the big questions, ladies and gentlemen, that we are discussing on this important topic, in fact, at this moment is which way will the Sri Lankan government and the new president, which way is he tilting, which way will the country tilt? Win-win ties, what does this mean for India? Can there be a balancing act as far as both India and China are concerned? And how will India protect its maritime security in face of Sri Lanka, in fact, trying to balance the interest of both India and China? Joining me at this moment, Rohan Samarajiva, Sri Lankan policy analyst, chairman of, in fact, the think tank there. Brahma Shalani, strategic affairs expert, is also with us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Shalani, the meeting with the Chinese, a similar kind of statement, telling the Chinese that their interests will also be taken care of. How should India view this?
I think what's significant is that Ankit paid his first overseas visit to India, not to China. But if you look at another Marxist prime minister in India's neighborhood, in Nepal, KP Oli, after taking office, he first visited Beijing. This was a breach of the long-standing custom in Nepal for a Nepalese prime minister to first visit India. So Ankit did well by coming to New Delhi first, and he hasn't been to China so far. He did meet with this senior party official from China. He did give the right kind of assurances in New Delhi, but we know how in the past Sri Lanka has allowed Chinese subs to dock at Colombo port, and that in the past has raised concerns in New Delhi. And also this talk about, about a balancing relations between, Sri Lanka's relations with India and China, pursuing a policy of equidistance between China and India. That harks back to what the Rajapaksa dynasty sought to do. They in fact came up with this phrase, equidistance. But India is located next door to Sri Lanka, while China is located far away from Sri Lanka. So it cannot be an equidistance foreign policy approach to India and China. I think Ankit made the right noises in New Delhi. He said the right things. And I think his policies will be watched very, very carefully by Indian policymakers.
Right. Just to try and understand the Sri Lankan perspective, Rohan, how worried should India be with this outreach to China as well? Of course, we understand there are two competing big nations, in fact, at this moment, and Sri Lanka will have to balance the interest of both. How do you see the president, the current president, in fact, whether he's succeeding or not as far as this endeavor is concerned?
The issue can be seen in three parts. One is ordinary commercial merchant vessels. I don't think there's going to be a big dispute about that. The second is military vessels that are called military vessels. And there are certain protocols that have to be followed for doing that. And that problem, I think, is manageable. The really difficult issue is research vessels. And that is the current friction. Now, what the Chinese party officials said, and it was not reciprocated in that particular communique, was that they would like this matter to be resolved. Because what we were living under was a suspension of all visits by research vessels, irrespective of country. Now, my understanding was that that time that we bought with that suspension would be used to develop a systematic approach, a protocol for handling these matters, because Sri Lanka has got an exclusive economic zone of 17 times its landmass. And I think India is also beginning to pay attention to this problem, because the word hydrography was mentioned in the joint communique. I think what we should encourage is joint India-Sri Lanka research activities in the maritime zone. Now, unfortunately, instead of a policy that we were expecting, as of this afternoon, the government has announced that they're going to handle these matters on a case-by-case basis, which is seriously a suboptimal solution, because you don't want to be arguing these things on a case-by-case basis, either from the perspective of Sri Lanka, Sri Lankans, and from the perspective of India. What you want is a protocol, a systematic standard operating procedure that is properly consulted, not necessarily in the eyes of the news media, and then implemented fairly and transparently with due notice. Because I think we can't continue to prohibit all research, but I would even say that, any research vessel that works in this region has to have experts,
Yes,
both from Sri Lanka and India, on it. And if people don't allow that,
right.
I don't think it should be allowed.
Brahmachalani, so let me understand this. What would be India would be watching these developments very, very closely. What would be a red line for India? Something that they want to, in fact, send across a message to the new Sri Lankan administration that red line should not be crossed. Else, of course, there will be strain on the relationship.
What China is seeking to do is to find some foothold in the Indian Ocean region. China has managed to gain dominance in the South China Sea. It's seeking now to march westward to the Indian Ocean. So this attempt to map the floor of the Indian Ocean through these so-called research vessels, which are huge ships, they are part of the military domain of China. They engaged in efforts to map the Indian Ocean seabed, to make it, to gain the kind of knowledge and understanding necessary for Chinese subs to operate by stealth in India's backyard. These are issues of concern to India because India is the dominant maritime power in the Indian Ocean. It doesn't want China now to expand its hold from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean region. So whether it's Sri Lanka or the Maldives, if any of these countries seeks to do things that are inimical to India's interests, there will be reaction from India. But I think what our fellow panelists said, that if there's any research vessel that seeks to engage in activity in Sri Lanka's backyard or in Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone, if there are Sri Lankan and Indian personnel on board, then obviously that will help to remove any misgivings, because there'll be then some degree of transparency. But you don't expect China to allow Sri Lankans, forget about Indians, even Sri Lankans to be actually part of the research activity. So I think that the Chinese, because of their opaque nature of carrying out maritime activities, they pose a challenge to whichever country with which they seek to collaborate with.
Right. Ron, how big a challenge is trying to balance both these, countries for Sri Lanka? Because there is already the development of the Hambantota port and the presence of the Chinese there, and India. And the president, when he came to India, he said that he would not let Sri Lankan soil be used for anything which challenges the security of India. At this moment, how big a challenge is to try and balance both these countries out for the Sri Lankan administration?
I think from the time of Mrs. Bandaranaike, who was a great friend of India, we have been balancing. I like to tell the story that in 1971, when we had the insurrection led by essentially the current president's party, he wasn't even born back then. India was sent us troops to ensure the security of our airport, our link to the outside world. And China was one of the first countries to give us arms and ammunition to supplement our meager resources. So I think this balancing can be done, but just be done very carefully and cleverly. Now, the previous president, who was a very experienced political leader, he had put this suspension in place. What we were expecting was that the suspension would continue and we would get a sustainable and broadly consulted policy. Instead, we are getting this case-by-case story, which is going to make nobody happy. Case-by-case means they tell us that they're coming in 2 months, and then we say either yes or no. That is, in my opinion, a very unsatisfactory outcome in terms of balancing. So I agree that we have to take our geographical location into account, and we have to ensure, as our president said, that India's security interests are looked after. And I think that's what many sane Sri Lankans of goodwill would want. However, we can't, as an independent country, we can't say that the Chinese can't come here. We have to have our relationships with them as well. But as I said, if we have a policy that includes the presence of Sri Lankan scientists, experts, etc.,
yes,
and maybe even in some cases of Indian oversight or participation, then I think the Chinese will have to decide that they'll have to do research with somebody else. But those are matters that can be put in overall policy rather than on a case-by-case basis.
So possibly till the time this some sort of a policy, doctrine does come through, it will be very closely watched with how the government is treading in the next few days as far as both these countries are concerned. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this discussion. With that, we are slipping into a very short break. News and updates continue here. Stay tuned. Welcome back now to our Trump Tracker series. President-elect Donald Trump has rejected a stopgap bill aimed at keeping the government funded beyond the end of the week, showing bipartisan efforts to prevent a government shutdown into turmoil. Now, the bill would have kept the government open until March 14th. A shutdown will occur at 12:01 a.m. on Saturday. There is currently no fallback plan. Trump is urging Congress to pass a comprehensive package before he takes office next month, calling for legislation that raises the government's borrowing authority and extends funding. He also insists on removing provisions supported by Democrats whose backing would be crucial for the passage of the bill. This early attempt to influence Congress more than a month before his inauguration could complicate efforts to avoid a shutdown that could disrupt air travel, law enforcement, and other critical services just days before the Christmas holiday. Trump has also warned Republicans supporting the current proposal could jeopardize their chances of re-election. More on President-elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the president-elect, has stirred further controversy, suggesting its northern neighbor, Canada, could join the United States of America as its 51st state. On the Truth Social uploaded on Wednesday, Trump claimed many Canadians would support the idea, arguing Canada would save massively on taxes and military protection. This isn't the first time Donald Trump has raised the idea during a dinner with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at his Mar-a-Lago estate in November as well. Trump reportedly joked about merging the two countries. This isn't the first time Trump has raised this idea. Now, Trump has been speaking about this. We are yet to hear from the Canadian government as far as Trump's assertions are concerned. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic Congresswoman nominated by President-elect Donald Trump as the next director of the National Intelligence, is facing mounting opposition in her confirmation process. Now, Gabbard was nominated for the intelligence role last month and has been criticized for the lack of experience and her position on Syria, Russia, and Ukraine. Watch this report for more.
This Indian-American former Democrat leader is Donald Trump's pick to become the new U.S. intelligence chief. However, there are questions being raised over Tulsi Gabbard's credentials. In the latest, 8 Republican senators seem unsure about supporting Gabbard to become America's top spy, according to a report. There are doubts about whether her nomination will secure Senate confirmation. The report suggests that there is serious pessimism about whether Gabbard would be able to secure the votes she needs to become Director of National Intelligence. However, Trump transition spokesperson Alexa Henning has said that no Republican senator has publicly said that they would vote against Gabbard. If the aforementioned 8 senators vote against Gabbard, she would need the support of 5 Democrats, something that is unlikely to happen.
Police forced to go after their political opponents.
The Director of National Intelligence occupies a powerful position that sits atop the nation's spy agencies and acts as the president's top intelligence advisor. Gabbard is a veteran who served for more than 2 decades, but she's facing a barrage of questions as she doesn't have the typical intelligence experience of past office holders. Public opinion also appears to be one of the hurdles Gabbard is facing. Polls suggest that only about 2 in 10 Americans approve of Gabbard's appointment, while about 3 in 10 disapprove. There are other concerns as well. Gabbard is facing criticism for meeting former dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, in 2017, and years later saying that he was not an enemy of the US, though she later labeled him a brutal dictator. She's also been viewed as being soft on Russia. Critics point to her opposition to the US military aid to Ukraine in the war against Russia. They say she parrots the Kremlin's views. On the other hand, in a scathing letter, a group of nearly 100 former national security officials have urged the Senate to carefully scrutinize Gabbard's nomination.
I want to address the issue that's in the headlines right now. I stand in full support and wholeheartedly agree with the statements that President Trump has made over these last few days with regards to the developments in Syria. My own views and experiences have been shaped by my multiple deployments and seeing firsthand the cost of war and the threat of Islamist terrorism.
Amid the doubts and questions, she's also found support as hundreds of veterans have signed a letter supporting her nomination. However, she would need a lot more than that if she's to occupy one of the most powerful positions in the incoming Trump administration. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
India and the United States have charted next steps in space collaboration, including human spaceflight, joint space exploration, and a commitment to facilitating commercial partnerships between space companies to advance the shared interest in the growing space economy. Meeting in Houston, officials from the 2 sides, including Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell and Indian Ambassador to United States Vinay Quatra, met NASA ISRO officials to identify new opportunities to strengthen their space partnership. Among the next steps discussed, including selecting 2 ISRO astronauts to train at the NASA's Johnson Space Center for the first ever joint effort between American and Indian astronauts. The confusion surrounding the venue for the ICC Champions Trophy 2025 is finally over. After months of delay, the International Cricket Council, the ICC, finally officially declared the venue for elite event. The ICC Men's Champions Trophy will be played across Pakistan and a neutral venue, the ICC said, for India and Pakistan matches. It means India will play the matches at a neutral venue, including the knockout games if India qualifies. My colleague Osama Saab has more.
The ICC has confirmed that the ICC Champions Trophy, all the matches involving India and Pakistan, especially in the Future Tours program 2024 till the 2027 cycle, will be played at neutral venues. What it basically means is that all of India's matches in the upcoming ICC Champions Trophy, which is going to happen next year, all their matches will take place at a neutral venue. Now, this can either be UAE or Sri Lanka, whatever that the ICC decides. Similarly, the T20 World Cup that is going to take place in 2026, which is being co-hosted by India and Sri Lanka, Pakistan will play all its matches, most likely will play all its matches in Sri Lanka and not in India. Now, ICC has also made a couple of more announcements with respect to the Women's T20 World Cup as well. That is going to take place in 2028. Pakistan is supposed to host the Women's T20 World Cup. Now, the big point here is that it is not a part of that Future Tours program that is 2024 to the 2027 cycle, but the arrangements of neutral venues will also apply to this particular tournament as well. Now, another tournament, that is the 2025 Women's ODI World Cup, that is going to take place in India. Pakistan will play all their matches at the neutral venue. So, as far as the schedule is concerned, it has not come out yet, as you mentioned, and we'll be hoping that that schedule also comes out soon.
This is all the time that we have in this edition of India Global. Updates continue here on NDTV World. Stay tuned.